Morning, everyone. I assume that you can all hear me. I'm going to share my screen with you. Um, you should see a screen that says the Formative Feedback Assessment Tool. If for some reason that screen is not visible, somebody give me a holler so that we can figure out what's going on. I'm guessing that a number of you were with our faculty training a half hour ago. Thank you so much for being on that one. For those of you who weren't, there's going to be another faculty training, same content this afternoon. I believe I'm working with time change. It's 1:30 for you, 3:30 for me. So I hope if you weren't able to attend this morning, you can attend this afternoon. So thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to continue talking to you about how you can use your course evaluations tool to connect with students and improve teaching and learning. I have my camera on right now just so you can see my face, but I'll be turning it off. Focus on the presentation that I'll be giving. I just want to say that today's session is slotted for an hour. We probably won't be here that long. I'll be demoing the tool. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions um, and discuss. But I predict that we will not take the whole hour. Nobody hates getting a little time back, so I'm sure that'll be fine. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. While I know there are some people who are still getting admitted. So off again, I know that some of you have already met me, but for those of you who are joining today's campus visit for the first time, I'm Dr. Bethany Jacobs. I'm a course evaluations consultant for Anthology, what you may in the past known as Campus Labs. I come to this position after 10 years as a faculty member at institutions like the University of Oregon and Georgia Institute of Technology. I have a lot of experience with working in the classroom with students and trying to figure out, what's the most effective way to keep my finger on the pulse of my student learning and staying connected with them, and particularly in these times that we're facing right now with a lot of us feeling disconnected from our students. How do we stay connected to them and keep care of what they're learning and making sure that they're getting what they need? We talked a lot about this in the faculty training session, and if you attend this afternoon's session, we'll talk about it more then. But the tool that I'm going to be sharing with you folks today really focuses on something that we call formative feedback, which some of you will be familiar with the idea of formative feedback. Many of you, I would suspect, others of you may not have thought much about it before, and that's okay. I want to begin by just formative feedback. And again, for those of us who've thought about this already, let's just consider it a refresher course for thinking about today's discussion. So really, when we talk about formative feedback, we also have to talk about summative feedback. Now, formative feedback is diagnostic. It's something that happens in the beginning of the term, at the end of the term, or throughout the term to really just how things are going in the classroom. It's an ongoing process. You don't just have final course evaluations. In one of the most common versions of formative feedback, of course, would be the test. The quizzes that we administer, the assignments that we administer, where we student learning over time. It's really process oriented. It's thinking about the process of how students are learning and how we can amend and grow our process to improve teaching and learning moving forward. As opposed to course evaluations, it monitors student learning during instruction rather than at the end of instruction. So summative evaluation, this is what we would call course evaluations or maybe the final exam. And it's really outcomes oriented. It's looking at the end of the term, learning is completed, what have we achieved? So it wants to about those outcomes. It wants to look at that big picture. And it evaluates student learning at the end of instruction rather than throughout the process. Um, now, uh, one of the things that faculty will sometimes say, and that I know I experienced during course evaluation season, you get this feedback from students and you find out that, maybe something worked really well that you wish you'd done more of, or maybe something didn't work really well. And you might have the experience of, well, gosh, I wish I had known this while I was teaching the class because I adjustments to teaching and learning, or to my instruction methods, and that would have been really valuable. But okay, I've got this summative feedback. I'm going to use that for the next time that I teach. I'm going to make it better for the next group of students. Formative feedback is really thinking about this group of students that I'm teaching right now and how I can make the learning experience best for them, as strong and effective for them as possible. So, in terms of the process of formative feedback, what we think about is, we give a lecture, we give an assignment, we have the application of a learned skill or concept, and then we get feedback from our students, whether it's in the form of the actual thing that we grade, that is itself a measure of how that application went, or whether it's feedback from students on how the learning experience went for them, a self assessment of sorts. And when we get that feedback, we make adjustments to. So many of us have probably had the experience where we have a unit that we're focusing on, we give a quiz or a lecture, we have an assignment. Maybe students don't perform as well as we had expected, or we get feedback that indicates that they really didn't um, bring home the process that we wanted them to. And so we say, okay, instead of moving on to the next unit, I'm going to have a recap session, or I'm going to have an additional lecture, or we're going to really go back to that learned skill or concept and focus on it a little more deeply. That's formative feedback in action. How we want the teaching and learning process to work. We get feedback, we adjust accordingly, and our hope is that learning improves as a result. So, what does the course evaluations tool do that is particularly beneficial, not just for students, but faculty? And I'm going to go into a demo of the tool in a moment, but first I want to talk about what the specific benefits are for these two groups. So, one of the benefits for faculty of using this formative feedback tool is that you're able to receive data on your student learning as often as you want, daily, per unit, each week. You have flexibility in how you're gathering this formative feedback. It also allows you to view the impact of your changes to instruction to see how your students are improving or growing in certain areas depending on your changes. It allows you to spot trends. So, gosh, I keep teaching a particular area, but I'm finding that when I teach in this particular area, I'm getting a lot of feedback from students saying that they're not understanding the lecture. So maybe I need to think about how I'm delivering those lectures. Um, it allows you to view and analyze the impacts of your changes to the course on a data level. Um, and it also allows you to stay connected with your students, because the formative feedback tool is about connecting with this class that you're working with, these students, their strengths, their struggles, and letting them know that you are invested in improving their learning as you go. Now, what's the benefit for the formative feedback tool? Well, it allows them to communicate directly with their faculty member. It allows them to reflect on their learning to the faculty member and share, here's what went well in today's lecture, here's what didn't. It also has really convenient delivery options. The tool I'm going to show you, students use it on their laptops, their tablets, their cell phones. It's really easy to use. Another big value is that it gives them the opportunity to actually impact the learning process and see that impact. So if their faculty member comes to them and says, I looked at our responses to the formative feedback survey. I see that these are some areas where we're struggling. Here's what we're going to do differently. The student can actually say to themselves, wow, I gave feedback and my feedback was taken seriously. And as a result of that feedback, my instructor is adjusting the learning process better suit the needs of me and my students, I guess say really matters in this class. Um, it's also really important because it and really useful because it allows them to become familiar with the idea of assessment as a practice. And in the faculty training, one of the things we talked about a lot was building a culture of assessment, a culture in the classroom where students are familiar with the idea that they should actually think about their learning. They should actually think about what is helping them learn and what they are achieving, and that they should assess their learning. When we use the formative feedback tool, we get students used to the formalized process of assessing their learning. And then when they get to their final summative course evaluations, by the time they get there, they're already familiar with this concept of assessment, and they've already seen the value of it. And this has the impact of not only raising response rates, but actually raising the thoughtfulness of the feedback given. And of course, it helps students to stay connected with faculty and feel like they have a way to connect with their faculty on what they're learning and how they're growing. So these are the benefits of the formative feedback tool that I want you to think about as we walk through and actually demo the tool today. So what is the instant feedback tool? Okay, it's a 7-question survey and it's adapted from the IDEA Teaching Essentials instrument. So for those of you who aren't necessarily sure what that means, the IDEA instruments that are used to survey your students, there are a number of instruments that are used. One of them actually asks students to reflect on what teaching methods they saw in the classroom. And we know that those teaching methods that they see actually correlate to the achievement of specific learning objectives. So the questions in this survey, there's 7 questions that are taken from that teaching instrument. While the end of term course evaluations will allow us to assess our classroom summatively, the formative feedback tool allows us to gather that formative data throughout the term. A couple of things to bear in mind. This tool is anonymous for faculty. Now, what that means is that the results that you get when you use this tool, they're not available to your department chair. They're not available to your dean. They are only available on your faculty page. Can you share them as part of a tenure and promotion package? Absolutely, and I would encourage you to do that. But you have the confidence of knowing that there's nobody looking over your shoulder and assessing your data. This is really just for you. Now, when I say that it's not anonymous for students, I want to point that out here because what I often get is as soon as I say that, I'll have faculty be like, no, this is a problem. It has to be anonymous. It's unethical if it's not anonymous. And I completely understand that perspective. But where that perspective comes from is a misunderstanding of what formative feedback is meant to do. Final summative course evaluations, yes, they should be anonymous. Ethical reasons why they should be anonymous when we do summative feedback. Formative feedback is about connecting with the group of students in front of you, learning how they're learning and changing your teaching in order to help them, to help this individual student. And so the fact that the student responses to these surveys are not anonymous, that is intentional. It's intentional because we want you to know how your individual students are doing. We want you to be able to connect with individual students who are struggling. And we'll talk more about what that looks like in practice in a moment. On the left there, you can see an example of what the survey looks like for a student who is filling it out on their smartphone, let's say. It's 7 questions with a slider bar where you answer on in a range from not at all to completely. And just in case you can't see, that screen, which I realize it's really small, I want to show you the actual questions that appear on this survey. The first 6 questions appear on a scale of not completely, and they're asking questions about what the instructor did in class. So for example, the instructor made it clear how each topic fit into the course. The instructor introduced stimulating ideas about the subject, or the instructor displayed a personal interest in you and your learning. the student would rate that on not at all to completely. The last question is just an overall yes or no. Did you understand the material covered today? And that's a really useful question, right? There are times when I've come away from my own lectures. Maybe I felt it went really well. Maybe I felt like I struggled, or there was a class activity. I'm not sure whether it landed. Being able to go to students and just ask them point blank, did you understand what we talked about today? And if they come back and they say yes, or they come back and they say no, that can really help me decide, okay, in the next class, I need to go back through this material again. Or in the next class, I know that they understood what we talked about last time. So I have a good foundation to move on to the next step in this teaching process. So these are the questions that are asked. Some faculty sometimes ask whether or not we can change the questions, or whether or not you can add questions. You cannot at this time. There may come a time at which that changes, where you can add custom questions. But really the purpose here is to use the questions from the Teaching Essentials, which to remind you, the IDEA instruments are based on over 40 years of research into what methods result in the highest learning for students. And so these are not random questions. These are questions with a lot of research behind them that shows that if we are achieving in these areas, our students are most likely learning what we want them to learn. So there's real value in these questions, though I understand the value of being able to add questions, and hopefully at some point in the future the tool will be able to accommodate that. So how do you get to this tool? It's available to you on your faculty page. And in fact, I would encourage, if you're in front of your computer right now and haven't done this yet, go ahead and log into your course evaluations page. It's just usu.campuslabs.com /faculty. You can log in just using your normal Utah State credentials. And once you've logged in there, you're going to see a main, looks something like what we've got here on the right. And then the tool itself is easily accessible from the top menu bar. You'll see the words feedback, formative feedback tool. So just giving everybody a moment to log into that real quick before we delve a little deeper into what it looks like. So when you log into the tool, this is what it's going to look like. At the bottom, what you're going to see is all of the terms in which you have taught classes. An individual course section will appear as a term, or I'm sorry, as an entry. Right, you're going to see this student access link. And something to bear in mind is that this link never changes. When you share that link with your students, it automatically takes them to whichever feedback session you have started. And you start a feedback session by simply going to the section in question. So, for this accounting 249 class, maybe I want to run a feedback session. So I click on the start button, and that will automatically activate this link. So you can share that link in an email, you can put it on your course management system, you can put it on the board. Students will log into that, and as soon as you've pressed start, that survey that I showed you a moment ago, that interface that you saw a moment ago with those questions, that's what the students will be able to access. The survey automatically open for 2 hours, and after that it closes. So you don't have to worry about turning it off. At the same time, you do have to be conscious of the fact that, you should communicate to your students, okay, today's lecture is over. You have until X time of day to complete your survey. I have some faculty who attach completing the survey to not to extra credit, but I'm sorry, I'm participation. They attach it to their participation grade. And so then once you've got it open and it's gathered the data and then closes, next thing you're going to have available to you are your reports. Okay. So when you click on the reports for a given course section, it's going to take you to every instance of the survey that you've for that specific class. So if you've run the survey once, if you've run the survey 6 times, all of those results are going to show up on your feedback summary, which is it appears on the right here. In the feedback summary, you have the ability to assess your session results. You can compare results for each question to other sessions. You can identify the student respondents, and you can identify past sessions. So delving into this a little bit bigger, a little bit deeper, what does this look like? So as you can see there, the top question, that's that, did you understand the course material? Yes or no. And you can see that it's indicated by the date at which the session was given. Underneath that, did you understand the course material? You'll see a bar graph for each individual question that was asked. Now, I have to apologize because the data that we're using here is from a test account. That bar graph obviously isn't particularly legible because it's all narrowed down to a couple of days in November. But in theory, if you were using this throughout the term, that bar graph would be spread across, and you'd have more detailed information. I see a question from Lisa. Is there a way to modify the time frame for feedback? Right now, it indicates that a session will close in 2 hours, but I teach asynchronously. The 2-hour time limit for feedback seems inappropriate during the pandemic. I'm completely sympathetic to that argument. That is something that we are talking about. Right now, there isn't a way to do that, but what I have seen other campuses do, or other faculty do, is they just run 2 sessions, and so they tell their students, for one of the classes, okay, now you guys fill this out, and then for the next group, now you guys fill this out. It's not a solution, but yes, Daniel, that's something that we're aware of and we are looking into. So looking back at this, a couple of things to bear in mind. You can hone in on a particular session. If you want to see what the results were for that individual session, you can click on November 1st session and see more detail. So this is what that would look like. So first off, you get 100% response rate, which means that you can have a high confidence in the results that you've got here. What we also see there is that 80% of students understood the material covered today. That's pretty good. That's good information. And then for each of the individual teaching methods, you can see on a T-score, which is based on, I believe it ranges from 30 to 80, although I apologize, I'm not entirely sure of that. You can see where students fell on these individual questions. I'm just going to take a moment to look really quickly at the chat because I see there's a little bit of activity. So this question about student feedback being anonymous, as I said a few minutes ago, individual student feedback is not anonymous. It's intended to not be anonymous so that we can actually identify which students are struggling and help them. Got a particular student, for example, who this sample student, let's say, who we look at their scores and we're seeing that over and over again, this is a student who's saying they didn't really understand the course material. And we know that we need to reach out to this student. We know that this is a great opportunity to connect with that student and try to help them. And so it's important that this data not be anonymous for that very reason, so that we can help individual students in this specific class. You'll also be able to see when you hone and you pin a specific student, their responses show up as darkened blue dots. So you can see where they fell over time. You can see the trends of how they fell over time, which is useful for thinking about, what were the lectures that they were actually struggling. Where are they? Where can I give them the additional help that they need? Brennan has asked whether there's a way to export this data into a spreadsheet or CSV format. There is not at the moment the ability to do that. I do hope that's something that we'll do in the future. In addition to being able to hone in on the individual student responses, the ability to hone in on individual sessions, for each of these questions, you have access to a suggestions box. Who are familiar with your reports that you get, particularly the formative responses that you get about your teaching, you'll remember that what's available to you for each of the teaching methods that we measure through the IDEA instrument is actual research from the organization into why this specific teaching method matters. How it helps students to learn, what particular learning objectives it correlates to, why it matters. You can download this as a PDF, and then on the there, you'll be able to see additional teaching methods that show up in the formative tool. So this is just kind of a brief overview of what the tool does. Other things to bear in mind is that every time you tool, you'll get a email at the end of the day with a sort of digest of what the results of your survey were. And then you can, really the value here is that you can adjust lectures, adjust class time accordingly, and really delve into where your students are struggling, and really be transparent with them about the learning process, which that's something that we also talked about earlier in the faculty training, is that a really great way to connect with our students in these times is to be transparent about the learning process and about what you want them to learn and how you want them to learn. And this is really designed to help you to do that. Now, as I said, this demo, obviously didn't take an hour, but I do open it up and see what you folks think, if there are things about this that appeal to you, whether you think you would use this. So I just got a question: how can we assure this kind of feedback doesn't have a negative impact on their grades? As it was mentioned earlier, some students may be hesitant to offer feedback on how their instructor is doing when their name is attached to the response. So really the hope here is that you would have transparent conversations with your students about why this feedback matters and why you want it. I can absolutely appreciate a student who thinks that this material could be used against them, not wanting to use a tool like this, not wanting to respond when their name is attached to us. This is really about the culture that you build in your own classroom of trust in why you're using this tool. If you don't think that you can use this tool without having a negative reaction to this feedback, then I would suggest not using it. But more importantly, something to remember is that there's no consequence to you of student feedback, and so there's really no reason why faculty would retaliate against students for this kind of feedback, particularly if they're being really honest that they want to use this feedback to improve instruction. Now, at the time, some faculty, what they'll do is they'll make sure that students know that they don't have to respond to this survey. It's not required. Some people make it part of the participation grade. Some people don't. They say it's purely optional. I would say that the best way to mitigate that anxiety is to just have really transparent conversations with your students about that. I want to get to some of these additional questions. So how frequently would you recommend for the survey in a given semester? So that really depends. I know faculty who do it every day in the last 5 minutes of class. quick thing that everybody does. I know some faculty who do it after every unit or at the end of every class. Or I know faculty who use it piecemeal. I had a really important lesson today, so I want to know how that went. It really depends on what you're doing in your individual class time and when it is most valuable for you to get that feedback. Now, that said, someone else down the line here has asked, how do you balance the data with survey fatigue? And that's a really important question. If you're giving this survey every day, um, rather than make that an assignment that students have to do every day, I would say have it be something that they do in the last 5 minutes of class, so that it's not something that they're having to do as extra homework. Um, but it really does benefit you. The more data you have, the more trends you can spot, the more growth you can identify, and the more opportunities for growth you can identify. So sorry to not have a more direct, use it this many times, but it really does depend on what you're trying to accomplish in your individual class. Someone asked, is there a way to link information from the feedback tool to our course's Canvas page? So there's not automatically that kind of integration that I am aware of, though you could certainly download copy the results and paste them into your course management page. Somebody asked, where is the recording of this presentation? So all of these presentations are being recorded and will be shared with your site administrator, Peter Crosby, who I'm sure will make them available to you. So I would just stay tuned to be able to get access to that recording and share with colleagues. How do we find the download PDF of why the teaching method matters? So going back, so let's say you're in the session, Melanie, I'm sorry, not Melanie, Jen, and you'll see this little, excuse me, you'll see this little button at the end of, at the bottom of every individual question that's been asked, that says suggestions. And when you click on that suggestions button, it's take you to the page with the actual why this teaching method matters. In addition, in your course evaluations page reports, if you go to your formative tab on your course evaluations reports, you'll be able to see all of the teaching methods. Each of those individual teaching methods has a link to these specific articles where you can download that information. So there's a couple of ways that you can get these articles on why this teaching method matters. Yes. So Matt mentions that the option of exporting the data to a spreadsheet seems like it would greatly improve this tool. I completely agree with you, Matt. I'm going to share that data again with our product manager, who really drives improvements to the tool. And I do hope that will happen in the future. Ning asks, assuming a lecture covers 5 topics, a student understands 3 topics but does not understand 2 topics. What option, yes, no, should she choose when answering the question, do you understand the materials covered today? Is there any way students can send written to IDEA rather than just a yes, no answer? Right now, there's no way to submit written comments. What I would say to a student in that situation is if there were 5 topics covered, and they understood 3, I would say that overall they did understand that day's material. But this is a great opportunity for you to have these conversations in the classroom. So if I were facing that situation, Ning, what I would say in the follow-up lecture is, or in my introduction of this tool, is I would give the exact scenario that you're talking about. And I would say to my students, now let's say you're in this position. 5, technically, by, statistically, that would mean that you would give a yes, but maybe you're feeling like, yeah, I understood 3 things, but not 2 things. Send me an email. Create a discussion board on your course management system where students can delve deeper into particular responses. So I have a faculty member at one of my campuses where they have an open discussion board that's called Formative Feedback Comments, where basically they encourage their students that, hey, if you felt like just answering those survey questions for today didn't quite get at something you communicate about today's lecture, go to the discussion board and give that extra context so that I know what you're thinking. I agree that it would be great in the future if this tool allowed for those kinds of comments, but the downside to that is, really the goal here is to make it as quick and pithy as possible. We don't want students, particularly if you're giving this survey over and over again, to feel like they have to give substantive comments every time they fill out the formative feedback survey. So there's pros and cons to being able to do that, but certainly a Discord activity or just open conversation with your students is a great way to get at the nuance of a scenario like you're describing. Cindy Jones says, I began a session for practice today and now tried to open the session again as I would with a 3.5-hour course. And it says session completed today. Given this, I run 2 sessions for feedback in one day. That's a really good question, Cindy. I was not aware of that being an issue. I am going to make a note to talk to my team and figure out why it's not allowing you to run more than 1 session in a given day, because from what I understood that wasn't the case. But let me look into that and try and get you some information on that. Is there anybody whose comment I missed or who has additional questions or wants to share verbal feedback or anything like that? So something that I really hope is if you do choose to use this tool, I really hope that you'll let us know. Talk to Peter Crosby about your interest in trying out the tool in your classroom. I'm always looking for feedback from faculty on how this is working for them. You folks have already identified some great ways that the tool might improve, but I'd really love to hear from you if this is something you end up using and you end up finding. Please let us know. This is the stuff I care about, so I would really value your continuing feedback. Daniel, this is a very interesting tool. As you speak to your team, would you share 2 concerns? 1, the inability to customize questions, and 2, the 2-hour time limit on responses. Yes, Daniel, I will absolutely share that feedback. Thank you very much. As I said, we weren't going to go the whole hour today. I'm going to give you those 20 minutes back. I'm sure you will appreciate them. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Sam has just asked, I want to use it. Is it too late for this semester or should I wait for spring? Don't wait for spring, Sam. Go ahead and start using it now. You can use it as often or as little as you want throughout the term. It's not like if you don't start in the beginning, it's not valuable to you. So yeah, if you're interested, go ahead and get started on it and let us know how it goes. Yes, there will be recordings of meetings. They will be made available to you, site administrator Peter Crosby. Thanks everybody so much for your time. And if you were not at this morning's faculty training, I hope to see you this afternoon at 1:30. Everybody have a great rest of your morning and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.